I want to thank everyone for coming. We're in the panel room, and I've got a wonderful group of people here today. We're going to be talking about vampires. So to start off, let's go around the room and introduce everyone. We'll start with you, Dacre.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Dacre Stoker, great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, and managed to, with the help of co-authors, become an international best-selling co-author of Dracula the Undead and Dracul, prequels and sequels to my great-granduncle's novel, Dracula.
Great. And Ilona?
We write together.
Yeah.
We sing, we dance, we tell stories.
We steal things.
We steal things, you know.
We have vampires kind of in our books.
Yeah, we kind of have vampires in the books. We have the space vampires.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
I guess we can do the space vampires.
Yeah, space vampires.
So we like to write together under Ilona Andrews. And that's it. That's all the introduction you're going to get out of me.
Yeah. And this is a one-eyed French bulldog.
There we go. Our mission is accomplished. We have it.
So that's Ilona and Gordon Andrews.
Yep.
All right. And next up, Nicole.
I'm Nicole Givens Kurtz. I'm the publisher from Wicca Memoirs Press, who in October will release Slay, Stories of the Vampire Noir, which is an anthology of vampire stories from the African diaspora. I also am a writer and a big fan of vampires.
All right, thank you. And next, Jeremy.
I am J.F. Lewis. The J stands for Jeremy. The F stands for something else. And I write the Void City series, which does have vampires, and the Grudgebearer trilogy, which does not, unless you count obnoxious royals.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Clay.
My name is Clay Griffith with my wife Susan, who is down in the lower corner. We write the Vampire Empire series, 4 books from Pyre Books. The first one is called The Greyfriar, Historical Alternate History.
All right, and Susan?
I'm Susan. I'm the other half of the Clay and Susan. He's actually down below me, rather than the other way. We also write, aside from vampires, we write werewolves and Victorian magic, and some books from Flash and Arrow, the TV series, so which we didn't have any vampires, but should have, in my opinion. So there you go.
All right, great. And finally, John.
I'm John Hartness. I'm the co-founder and publisher of Falstaff Books, a independent press based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I write a few different series, including one that features Dacre's great-granduncle's intellectual property, so I'm really glad that's public domain, and another that is vampire comedy, because the world needs more fat vampires.
All right, so let's start it off with the question. We'll start with you, Clay, and Susan. You can both answer on this. What makes a vampire for you? Basically meaning when you're changing tropes, because that seems to be what people love to do, is change up what we get to know with vampires. At what point does change it to something other than a vampire for you?
I'm not sure where the line is. For me, you can play a lot with the tropes. I don't have any problem with messing with them a great deal. I think the fundamental aspect of a vampire that makes it a vampire to me is that it needs to be in some form parasitic on humans. It needs to have a cooperative life by taking its life from humans, usually blood. They can be sexy or monstrous, either one, but I think it requires that parasitic element with humans for me.
Yeah, for me, I like playing with the lore, so I will tweak that lore aspect a lot more. I tend to like both sides, but I think there has to be an element of danger, an element of that you don't know, you can't control them, that they're not something that can be controlled. You can't make them nice all the time. You can't make them dark all the time. They're not quite in the shadow or in the dark completely. But I think you need to have that element that they're not going to always be nice. There's always that element that they're going to lose control, that they're going to do something, like Clay says, to attack a human, to drink the blood, to do something. They're going to be violent at some time, and whether that's an element that you control or not is up to the author.
Okay, great. Nicole, your take on it.
So when Clay said there has to be a parasitic relationship, I thought about like this exchange of blood. I thought about Blade, and I thought about how they had reached a point where synthesizing blood for him allowed him to, kind of quell that raging hunger. And I thought about, well, I think Blade is a perfect vampire, but in that I guess that parasitic relationship is not necessarily on humans, but it's on other vampires. And if you think about, but I do think that's a key element of it. But I like how it's kind of subverted a bit. And if you think about Octavia Butler's Fledgling, right? Or you have a young vampire ravaging hunger, right? Still parasitic relationship with a human being. I think that's a key part of it. I think when that ceases to be a part of it, I don't think of them as vampires, right? I don't see vampires as pets. I can't get that, right? I can't, that doesn't happen. And so I also agree with Susan that there has to be some level of danger. I mean, I think that's part of the attraction, is like, in much the same way that Frankenstein is, can you corral this creature? Can you corral this monster? Can you make it beautiful and make it more human? And so that's the appeal for me in terms of vampires. But I think when those things are lost, they cease being vampires to me. They become something other.
Great. Ilona and Gordon.
I think fangs for us, definitely. A vampire has to have fangs, and there has to be that iconic image of biting down this and having blood, and that's really what the image of vampire is about. I'm not necessarily sold on the parasitic aspect of it. I see it as more predatory than parasitic. I mean, yes, after all, we don't view a tiger as a parasitic creature. We view him as a predator. So because we do tend to twist tropes so much, we kind of moved away from necessarily drinking blood as far as our vampires are concerned, but they still have the fangs, and there's still that moment of basically kill with the blade, with the fangs and blood spraying over. I can't move away from it. I know people have energy vampires, but to me that's not a real vampire. That's something else. Some kind of other creature. I guess that's for me. What about you?
I think the predatory, when you said the predatory aspect of it, that's the biggest thing for me. Also for me particularly, it's being undead. I guess, like, if it's alive, to me, it's not as much a vampire, which is weird because we have a live vampire.
We have a live vampire.
I know. But like, for me, I mean, if it's alive, okay, like Eddie Murphy's vampire in Vampire in Brooklyn, like if it's alive and it can like maybe even have like offspring, then to me it's something else. Like it's a different kind of vampire. I guess I'm a traditionalist.
You're a traditionalist.
I think they're dead. That's it. They're the undead. That's it. I don't know. And the way they make more vampires is to bite people and infect them. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Jeremy.
You can't lose the monster aspect, so I think it can be summed up. A friendship between a vampire and a human is like a friendship between a dog and a chicken nugget. The only real question is how many bites it will take, and as long as you have that in the background, then I think you have what's recognizable as a vampire.
Okay. Dacre.
So obviously I do come from a traditional background, but I'm not a stick in the mud. I realize that Bram Stoker didn't invent the whole thing. So, it's his rule book is not the only rule book, but in my writing, because I've obviously done a prequel and a sequel of in the same era, my vampires and the ones that J.D. Barker and I've used have all been pretty similar to what Bram created, which is the very traditional vampire. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, because I agree with most everybody else, parasitic, feed on blood, but the supernatural element. I really like that. Obviously, the natural world we're beginning to understand, and during different eras when you set your stories, the technology and the education will help people understand the natural world. But the supernatural world is something still being discovered even to this day. And so I think that's a really important element of these vampires, is they don't follow traditional rules. As long as the author creates a believable world and builds up these changes and tropes to make them convincing, then I think anything goes and it's okay.
All right. John.
So one of my series, I use vampires as the protagonist. So I'm going to pivot a little. And for me, using a vampire protagonist, one of the things that's inherent is the dual nature and the warring natures of the creature, the person, or the warring natures between the creature and the person. So I feel like it's pretty key, because you don't want to write an entire series of books about a protagonist that everyone will hate. So you kind of need to like the lead of your series. So you need to find the humanity in the monstrous, but never lose sight of the monstrous, because that gives you an inherent tension in your character, and there's something that will always be there for your character to fight against. There will always be conflict built in. Even when you've solved all the problems in the narrative, you've still got the fact that you eat people for breakfast. So I feel like gives you something to work from, that duality, that internal conflict. It's a good easy place to start.
All right, great. The next question, I'll start with you, Dacre, and it may be a simple question, but the most influential vampire in your writing life, and I'm not meaning your favorite necessarily, but the one you strive for or want to completely avoid or emulate, or have the character emulate, whatever. What's your take on that? And like I said, it could be an obvious answer, but.
Well, sadly, I'd love to be super creative and just shock you and say, oh, it's Orlok from Nosferatu, and everybody go, he's, what the hell is he talking about? But no, it's got to be Dracula, only because, I have only written 2 books, co-authored 2 books, and Dracula is, the primary vampire that we're dealing with. We have included others, we've invented some others, but your question really was who's the main influence, and that is what Bram Stoker has created. I haven't strayed too far yet, like some of my other co-authors on the panel, which is great. I just haven't gone there yet. Not enough seasoning, but so that's the tropes that Bram attached, the reactions of other characters in the novels. I'm still sort of working in that world. So sorry to disappoint you. That was your predictable answer, but that's what I'm sticking with.
That's why I ask it, just to be sure. Next up, Jeremy.
I don't know. I think if I had to pick a perfect vampire, I mean, Dracula is definitely up there. I'm more of a Varney guy, so I like the tortured aspect and the idea of somebody who at times means good, at times means evil, because they're a person. And so whether they're a monster or not, you still need to be able to see the person in there somewhere, even if if it's like in the Buffyverse, Spike would be probably my second choice, because you can see him. Even though the demon is there in control, there is also a personhood to it.
Okay.
Damn you, Lewis.
Ilona and Gordon.
Yeah, technical difficulties.
Oh.
Gosh, okay, so no offense to Mr. Stoker. Coming from Russia, we've had fairy tales with folk tales with vampires for a very, very long time. So when I finally got to read Dracula, I was like, and? Yeah, it wasn't the same kind of evolutionary, because I knew exactly how the story would go, because we've seen like iteration of it in various forms. So I guess for me, to be honest with you, I am very visual. So Vampire Hunter D, especially the anime, was a huge thing, because it had that really cool element of vampires where they were fast and predatory and strong, and they had all these cool magical powers. And that, was quite different from a lot of the vampires that we see, in the older Western literature, where they moped around and, were terribly conflicted. Vampire Hunter D, it's like, nope, kill. And so also I think Anne Rice was a huge influence too, because I remember reading it in English. It was one of the very first books that I managed to get through with a dictionary. I was in high school when I arrived to US. And that was very interesting to me, because I didn't know anything about New Orleans. I didn't know anything about that particular culture. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. It's like a historical chronicle. But I have to tell you again, the moping aspect got to me after a while. Like, I read Vampire Lestat.
Oh, Louis mopes.
Louis mopes endlessly. Oh my God, man, just get some Xanax or something for the dude. It's like, it's nonstop. But, so for me, it was like, I stopped after Vampire Lestat. I was super good. And yeah,
that sounds good.
Those are my two influences. You go.
Because I'm old, I'm going to say like the Dracula, but from the Hammer films, especially Christopher Lee's. Those were just, when you're a kid, like, I hate to say it, but especially like you're a young guy, you're like, oh, the Hammer films. There's a couple of reasons I like those.
Yeah.
But those were a big deal, right? And for like me as a kid, that was Dracula. It was Christopher Lee in those films. And then also, weirdly, Barnabas from Dark Shadows was a vampire from my childhood. I know, I'll tell you about it later. And then I think book-wise, I would have to also go with Anne Rice. I was in my early 20s, and it was an Interview with a Vampire, and he was super mopey. And then The Vampire Lestat,
which was just awesome.
Where he was awesome. So that's probably mine, I guess.
All right, Susan and Clay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know Clay's answer, so. For
I
me,
better change it.
For me, I was not into the horror stuff until I met Clay, so it was a very different formative stuff for me. I read a lot of literature. I actually liked the Tanya Huff vampire, Henry Fitzroy, who was, your typical good guy vampire, but there was still a darkness about him. Hell, I grew up on Count Von Count from Sesame Street, so I've got a whole different aspect of vampires. Yeah. I mean, I thanks to Clay, I've got an appreciation of the horror aspect of vampires, and there's some great vampire movies out there that scare the crap out of me, and I like that because I like that bit of darkness, that bit of fear that you get when you have it. But I also like the fact that they're human, that they're, or undead human, that there's some aspect that they're fighting, and they want to sort of get past that. So I get a lot of those, like Buffy, Spike. Angel never really did it for me, but Spike, because he was struggling, he was dark, he was vile, he was evil, and then he struggled to come out of it and try and find his way to something better. So I'm kind of that thing. I grew up on Hannibal King from the comic books with Blade, and those kind of characters still resonate more for me just because I like it as a human conflict story.
Well, Mine is Dracula because it's sort of the most formative book I ever read. But more specifically, in the 70s, Marvel did a comic called Tomb of Dracula that is sort of my favorite version of the character. Not straight superhero by any means. Occasionally Spidey would drop by, but not too often. But he's very physical. He's very action-oriented. He exploits his powers. He can shift into mist and wolves, with the drop of a hat. So he's sort of a superhero, and he does wear a cape. But that version of Dracula, the action hero version, he's a bad guy, but still, the sort of Zorro-y Dracula, I think I took a lot from, because we write action stories that have vampires in them. So, Tomb of Dracula, man, that's still my favorite.
All right. John?
So for dialogue, it's Spike, because I think Whedon writes brilliant dialogue that resonates really well with a contemporary audience. So for dialogue, Spike, but to be honest, Vampire Bill from not the Sookie Stackhouse books, but from the TV show True Blood. My whole series started off because I was watching True Blood and wanted to know why all the vampires were really hot. Like, don't they bite any ugly people? I mean, I'm fat. I'd be way easier to catch, and I pack more blood than Clay. He's skinny.
Yeah.
I got at least an extra quart. There should be more fat vampires. So Charlaine Harris's whole world of vampirism and some of the weaknesses that she incorporated, some of the different elements there, but the tortured nature of Vampire Bill, who wants to do good things, but he still eats people for breakfast. So that's probably those two for me, Spike for dialogue and Vampire Bill from True Blood for a lot of the other characterization things.
Nicole?
So I was listening to everyone else talk and my brain was just like firing. So I cut my teeth on Jean Pierre from the Anita Blake series.
Jean-Claude.
Jean-Claude, yeah. Sorry, that's how long it's been. So he is like the quintessential vampire, right? He's sexy. He's, trying to do the right thing, but not always. So he has a very dark undercurrent that's attractive. But for me personally, I like Akasha, the Queen of the Vampires, right? From from Anne Rice's series. And Aaliyah's portrayal of her is this first of all, she's the queen of all vampires, right? And she's a black chick, right? Which is major homage to the fact that humanity comes from the cradle of Africa, right? So that was amazing. But also the fact that she just was lethal and did not care. There was no, let's be nice to the food, right? They're food. And so she kind of epitomized that monstrous piece of vampires that we just finished talking about earlier, that predatory nature, that dark force. She's amazing. But I also like Selene from the Underworld series for the same reason. Only because she's very lethal and is willing to protect what she needs to protect and do and bend the rules around the area of morality, right? The morality that they resurrect and create. And so when I think about, and I know that there are two women in that, it's also very important that they are two very, I'm going to break the PG-13 thing, very badass women, right, who are incorporating the elements that I love about vampires. And so when I'm looking for female vampires, they don't always have to be kick butt in the sense that they are very violent and fighty, but because Selene isn't always. She can also be very tender and compassionate. And so I like those pieces of all three of those characters.
All right, great. Now, the next question is going back to the tropes. Which ones do you guys think are played out? Which ones have been discarded that you think were discarded too early? Stuff like that. And I'll start with Jeremy.
Played out. I mean, definitely the whole moping and whining about being hot, sexy, and undead forever. You know, that a lot of vampires don't have it all that bad. And to me, that's the thing, making vampires too easy, I guess, which would be, the played out part for me. If you're going to write a vampire, if they're going to be powerful and they're going to be understandable, then there has to be a price, and we have to see it. And if you can see it in the Void City books, you know, being a vampire is particularly unpleasant. All your bodily fluids get replaced with blood. Some vampires, and particularly protagonist, has to kill people occasionally. Tries not to, but there are times where he's just that hungry. And, you know, so to me, you've got to have that in it. And if you don't, well, then you've just kind of neutered your vampires. And some people do it really well, and it's really fun anyway. And, you know, that's the cool thing about having so many different authors. You give somebody an idea that I would think would be played out, and they demonstrate that, no, it's not. You just weren't creative enough. So, you know, anything where you're just approaching it like that and then not putting your own spin on it, not making it make sense.
Okay. So what you're saying is them being so powerful, you need something either that takes away that power, or you need an antagonist for them that helps rein them in?
Well, it's like, all right, so I'm a comic book guy, so to take Superman. Some people think Superman's very boring to write because he's just so powerful, so we invent a million kinds of kryptonite. No, it's just that most of Superman's really interesting opponents come at him not through power, but because they threaten things he cares about, and they make him make hard choices. So you have those moments where he could fix everything, and he could make everyone do exactly what he wants them to do. But in the Brian Michael Bendis's run, there's this great moment where he encounters a new villain, and he says, okay, so you haven't done anything too bad yet. So if you'll just stop, give me a moment, talk to me, explain what's going on, and if you'll do that, if you will just right now make the right choice, then look, trust me, people will believe in you because I'll be standing right next to you saying, this is a great person. Yes, they did some bad things, but look, give them a chance. So it's that aspect. So I know that's, again, Superman, not vampires, but the same kind of thing. So if you have a vampire who is nigh unstoppable, then, well, the problem being they're in love with an 80-year-old woman who won't let them turn her. And so this has a huge impact on their existence, because now eternity is a ticking time bomb, because really, how long can that 80-year-old last? You know.
All right, thank you. And Nicole.
Oh, she might have froze.
I need the question again.
Oh, there she goes.
Nope, I need the question again.
All right. What tropes do you think are either played out or underutilized, or?
Oh, played out. Oh, for sure. I mean, we don't want any more vampires that are sparkly. And honestly, I don't care to hear Edward's version of anything. I just don't. Older vampires with teenage girls, played out. Kind of done with that. So and in many ways, I think that you could have, like in the case of Fledgling, which you can have an underage vampire protagonist that is not, that's a vampire in its true monstrous sense. You can have that, but you have to be very particular about the world that you're creating. And I think that that has not been explored enough, and it could be because it makes people uncomfortable. But I think it raises a lot of interesting story arcs and conversations that don't always get addressed in horror and don't always get addressed in the vampire mythos.
And Dacre.
Well, I think we're over the whole thing about vampires can only have any powers in the dark. You know, that's one of those that's, you know, been taken care of. So let's move on from that. I think we've solved that. But there's still lots of struggles about how you actually kill a vampire. Some of those tropes do get mixed up, and sometimes very effectively, with when you've got crossbreeding going on, werewolves and hybrids. That makes life interesting. That's still to be determined. What is the best way to kill one based on, you know, the world you've created? And then the same with transformation. Is it 1 bite, 2 bites, draining blood, bring them back to life? That's something that, yeah, even though it's been around since the early days, there are still interesting and creative things that are kind of going on. And I think to sort of sum up everything, it's still that we want to see vampires that have a lot of power, and it's obviously supernatural power. But for their victim, there is still a choice that victim makes. It's sort of not like the all-powerful Frankenstein that can just crash through any door and just crush their victim. If you become a victim of a vampire, I get kind of bored when they're just, you know, so much blood and guts going on that, you know, the fighting is irrelevant. I like to see the choice that the victim makes is the choice ultimately that dooms their fate. And I think that makes cool struggle, that makes cool tension. So that's something that I think is still needed to be utilized by writers and still, you know, exploited by writers. You know, that human choice is still what can get you.
All right. John?
I like to play with the religious aspects of it. The idea that religious symbology or faith or holy ground repels vampires and why that happens. I grew up in the Protestant southeastern United States, so I've got issues with organized religion. And you can tell that by reading most of my books that I am working through some crap. But that's something that I feel like it either gets ignored and completely not touched on, or it's just accepted as canon that they can't touch holy ground, but the why isn't ever addressed. And writing multiple series gives me the ability to play with it in multiple ways and answer the question in multiple ways, depending on what I think will be interesting. So that's an aspect of the vampire character that I like playing around with. I think the super sexy hot vampire is tired as hell. I think big fluffy dudes are sexy. So I think the shirtless Skarsgård vampire, done. That one we're finished with. We need more dad bod vampires.
Have you ever read the series Fat Vampire by Johnny B. Truitt? Yeah.
I've read about half of the first one, and then I got distracted. I think I had a deadline, so I haven't made it through. But 2 other friends of mine, Rick Gualtieri and Drew Hayes, both do a really good job of spinning the sexy vampire and setting that on its head. With Fred the Vampire Accountant is Drew Hayes' series, and Bill the Vampire, which is a giant nerd vampire, which is Rick's series. So those are both, I think, really good examples of people that have abandoned the sexy vampire.
Right.
I think there's also, Andrew Fox's Fat White Vampire, where the problem is he's feeding in the South, and so there are all those lipids in the blood. So he's gaining weight, even though he's immortal.
In my Black Knight Chronicles, one of the first things my secondary character, Greg, wanted to do as soon as he got turned, because he was a fat kid, always been a fat kid. So now he's got limitless energy. So he just treadmills and treadmills and treadmills. And then he's like, I am magically trapped as a fat vampire forever. It really is a curse.
I would like to see more like different types of vampires from, like, as I mentioned, I have this anthology about vampire stories from the African diaspora. And that's only because in many instances you don't see very many Black people as vampires or anyone else. And so I'd like to explore, I'd like to see that become a very hot topic, and not in the sense that you have like secondary characters like you do with Suki Stackhouse, but that you see them as protagonists in leading stories. Like, what does that look like? What are those stories like? And so I'm very excited to get a lot of submissions, right? And I'm reading through those short stories now and and it's really difficult to pick out, because you don't want to publish them all. To pick out the ones, the cherry pick the top ones, but I would like to see that become more of a trend and I think that those avenues would open up so much more to the vampire mythos than what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on that too, because that was the thing that Ilona had brought up about there's cultures. Every culture has some sort of vampire type creature. And we don't get to see any of that diversity, any of that kind of culture brought in these days. It's always the same type of look and feel for a vampire. And I want to see much more reaching out to all the different histories and all the different cultures and bring more of that, and not just place that in a typical package that we see every day on the screen. I want to see the diversity. I want to see the different aspects and learn the different cultures. And some of them are scary as hell. I mean, the Japanese vampires are terrifying, and there's so many different ones, and I want to see them all. I don't need to just see one particular type. And all the capes, I want capes back there.
And I think it could be really useful in the sense of going back to the mopey vampires. I think one of the things she did really well was Claudia. You know, here you have a little kid vampire, which isn't really done, and there's obvious reasons, but that had such an impact on a reader to see that and go, oh my God, what would that be like? Because of course that's,
yeah, as did let the right one in, same thing.
Yeah. So, all right, Clay.
I guess I would say that in terms of tropes, none of them are played out if you can do something new and different. The bottom line is we write vampires, which are the most stereotypical fantasy element ever. People laugh when I say I write vampire books because they're vampire books.
How many times have you been told that vampires are over?
I was told 4 times while we wrote our first book that vampires were over. And
I was told by every agent I submitted to.
Yeah, they're done. In fact, Neil Gaiman tweeted one time about, I was going to write a vampire book, but vampires are done. I thought, shut up, Neil. But nothing is too much. You can do a lot of things. You can do them different. Just do something new with it. No, nothing's played out. Eventually, someone will bring back capes, and it'll be a big thing again. Someone will bring back, I don't know, everything. I mean, we took all the tropes. Since our vampires, unfortunately, Gordon, weren't undead. Ours were, a living parasitic species. We looked at the mythology and said, how can these creatures behave that would give rise to the myths about them? So we looked at all the vampire tropes and then tried to figure out what would our vampires have been doing in the real world that people would have interpreted the way our mythology came to us. So we played with a lot of tropes. We still couldn't figure out how to work garlic into it, but we may get that in eventually.
Ooh, I solved the garlic thing.
What's the garlic thing?
My answer to the garlic thing was that Dracula ate an Italian dude once and he just didn't like the taste. And ever since then, it became canon.
Oh, Oh, well, he is the boss.
And,
Oh.
you know, that's the fun of writing the most famous vampire in the world in a series that is inherently smart-assed, because I do crap like that. Like, no, I don't have a problem with garlic. I just didn't feel like Italian that day.
Yeah. So basically, do anything you want, just do something new with it.
Yeah.
Ilona, Gordon?
Well, tropes are played out until there's a book that uses them and becomes a major bestseller. So, you know, you can go as far as the Bible. In the Hebrew writings, you can read the continuation of Esau Jacob. Esau grows things, attempts to bite Jacob's neck,
But
but God turns the Jacob's neck to ivory. So there you go. There's your vampire right there. 2,000 years and seems to be, you know,
Oh, that's
still
older than
there.
2000.
Yeah, that's
No,
probably
that's
older than
Old
2000.
Testament,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
Old Testament. But
You dirty heathen.
the thing is, if you write commercially, sexy vampire has a built-in audience. You ignore that audience at your peril. So you have to make some deliberate choices. Now, that said, we have two different series of vampires. In one series, they're mindless, almost insect-like creatures, which are controlled by necromancers, kind of like remote-controlled cars. And they have no soul, they have no ego, they're literally just mindless.
Just the hunger,
Yeah, vehicles of destruction.
violence.
The other vampires are space vampires. They actually, they have their
Sexy.
own, yeah, they're sexy
Sexy
vampires.
space vampires.
They had their own planet, and an alien species came and tried to conquer them. And unfortunately, they hit them during the medieval period. And so they successfully vanquished their enemy and went into space, because they went into space during medieval time. Socially, they did not advance. So you have vampire knights, very religious. Periodically, they come to Earth. They're usually, you know, if they crash on Earth, they go into stasis pods, which look kind of like coffins. And, you know, because their armor is so solid, you have to literally get a very large piece of wood and impale them with it to kill them. So that's kind of how we played with tropes. It's really depending on what you want to do with the myth. The myth is there for you to play with.
It's not a trope I think that's played out, but it's kind of one I missed. And it goes back to the fact that I'm very old, is the dad vampire in Lost Boys. I missed that aspect of it, to where he was the father figure of those younger vampires. And you don't see that as much. He didn't create them and abandon them. He literally was trying to bring his girlfriend's boys into the family. What did he say? My boys and your boys.
Janine Frost,
Does she?
Lynn Cheris is like the big dead vampire.
I
They
kind
give
of do
them
miss
no
that,
end of
yeah.
grief.
That almost benevolent in his weird way
Yeah.
vampire, kind of.
Who just wants a family.
And he was just this nice, boring, older guy that
Yes.
really liked the mom. I don't know. Maybe I missed that. Oh, Jake's
And-
gonna have to go.
Just 1 second. I just wanted to say bye to
Oh,
Dacre.
Jason. Holiday.
Thank you
Okay,
so much
sorry,
for
guys.
coming.
Sorry, I've got to
Thank
jump,
you.
but listen, it's been wonderful. Appreciate everybody. Take care.
Good to see you again.
Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.
That's great, because that gives me a minute to jump in and say there's nothing like being halfway through a panel and realizing that two of the people you're on the panel with wrote one of your favorite books you've read this year. Because I just discovered Clean Sweep and that series this year,
Oh,
and I friggin' love those books. But I forgot who wrote them.
I forget sometimes too, dude. I have no
Yeah,
idea.
like some couple did.
Yeah.
I was like, space vampires. Why does that sound? Oh, son of a. So yeah, those are so much fun.
And I will say, Ilona Andrews, their vampires in your magic books are the most terrifying to me recently. Just those ones are incredible. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
yeah, that's one of the formative ones, which I was going to bring it up, but I balked. But
You didn't want to
I do
fail.
love them.
Uncomfortable. Moving on.
All right, so one thing that I've noticed, especially, you know, reading and researching and remembering all the different forms of vampires I've dealt with throughout my life, they can't seem to settle into an area because you've got, I grew up obviously watching reruns at this point of the Munsters. I did watch the Monster Squad, so I am that old. But you've got the comedy aspect of it, and then you've got the horror aspect. What are your guys' take on why vampires are able to jump across like that? Because you think vampires, and the first thing out of most people's heads is Dracula and horror. So I'll go ahead and start with you, Ilona and Gordon again.
You know, I think the reason personally, I'm gonna jump in here, is that they're funny, or people make them funny, is because that natural tendency to take something that's very scary and to make it less scary by making it funny, or the absurdity of it. Was it Dracula, Undead, and Loving It?
Yeah.
That's a funny one. You want to take this thing that scares you and make it less scary by like laughing at it or making it absurd. You know, I think what's his name did that a little bit with the Irish vampire and Preacher. He kind of almost made him like a comedy, like a foil, like a comic foil or sidekick. And I think people want that. They want it to be scary sometimes, and they want to laugh at it.
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes, like.
Well, you know, and that also in terms of narrative, jokes always land when you make kind of like a dark, I don't know, a dark environment for them to land in. Like, you know, a giant creature comes out and you know, swings its club and everything is terrible and he's gonna kill everybody, and then somebody walks out and says, "Hey, Tiny," and you know, everybody laughs. So I think that's part of it. We have so much dark mythos. We're afraid of the dark. We're afraid of what's hidden in there. We're terrified of being eaten, you know, and the vampire ticks all those boxes. And then it's also unkillable and immortal kind of monster. So yes, I think out of self-defense, we make it funny. And it's extra funny because it's so scary.
Nicole, you were nodding your head along.
With Preacher, which is one of my favorite comics and TV show, actually. So yeah, I was loving the fact. I was like, oh yes, that's hilarious. I'm not old enough to have watched The Monsters, mind you. But I do think what Ilona was saying was correct, is that you take something horrendous and you make it funny, and therefore it's a little bit more palatable. It's easier to take, and it's less scary. And vampires are funny. I mean, they just are. They're like, they become bats, you know, they count, and that counting thing is real, right? So if you drop things, they have to count them.
Yeah,
So like that's like that's a real, as much as I say real, but as much as real as vampires can be. And so I believe that, and I think that that's why they often are comical, because the things that can stop them, like garlic, wooden stakes, they're preposterous, right? They're everyday garden items you find out in the back. Hey, I'm growing some garlic and the sticks for the tomatoes were good. Like, if you think about it in that sense, it's not as scary, and I think that's why they're able to be able to cross between being these horrendous, monstrous beings into being something that's ridiculed and funny and humorous.
All right. Jeremy.
Well, I agree that there's definitely the whole whistling past the graveyard aspect. And, you know, we talked about different traditions of vampires earlier. So like the Nukakube, it's really scary when the head comes flying off and the weird fangs, but fight one in a bowling alley. And then, you know, there is the root of comedy. So it's I think it's just natural to poke fun at things that scare us.
Susan and Clay?
For me, this is something that's been around now for a long time. And when you've got this much material building after all this time, you're going to play with it in new and unique ways. And one of my favorite shows now is What We Do in the Shadows. And it takes everything that we've read, watched, no matter what, over the centuries of this, and have basically flipped it on its ear and showed us it, even though it's in the shadows, it showed it in a completely new light. And it's hilarious. And I think because there's just so much material to work with now, and it's been in our conscious minds for so long, that I think playing with it in terms of humor is just a way for, like they say, to deal with it and to just have fun with the mechanism of vampires and supernatural and whatever else.
Yeah, I think particularly like what we do in Shadows or like Grandpa Munster, you take these nearly invulnerable, super powerful characters and you put them in the same life you live. They have to pay bills and they're bothered by people coming to their home. They have guests who won't leave, that kind of thing. And it's sort of like what, for instance, The Tick did for superheroes. You know, a guy living in an apartment with his friend and they're, you know, eating dinner and there's an episode. So you take the power and majesty of someone like Dracula and you surround them with, you know, having to pay the gas bill. It's, you know, it's a pretty natural.
Or city council meeting.
Yeah, it's a natural transition. Yeah.
All right, John.
So the comedy for me comes from the same place the horror comes from. They're us. You can't look at a vampire a lot of the time. You can't always see the fangs. Some people, I mean, let's face it, I write books for a living. How often do you think I see the sunlight? The fact that they are built on this same framework that we are, and that in most canons, they started off as human and were transformed, gives us all of the pieces of humanity to play with, all of our failings. And Jack Ketchum proved that humans are the scariest monsters ever. Nobody can do worse things than we can. So that gives us both the humor and the horror, because they have all of the strengths and weaknesses and failings and fears and hates that we do. So we've got all of those places to mine when we're looking at creating a vampire. If we want to create a funny vampire, well, what are the stupid parts of yourself? Okay, write it down. Okay, you want to make a scary vampire? What scares you other than an IRS audit? Although, like I said, Fred the vampire accountant. So yeah, I think the fact that they're us is both the root of their comedy and their horror.
All right. Now, for people starting out writing vampires, even though they're done and no more vampire books, you know, are ever going to sell, before I get into it, I do want to say thank you to Nicole. It looks like you got to head out for something as well. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you guys for having me. Great time. Thanks, Jason, for moderating. Bye, all.
Good to see
Bye.
you.
Bye,
Take
Nicole.
care.
All right. Where was I?
People who are starting out writing vampires.
Okay.
Don't.
People who are starting out, what is don't? Okay.
Yeah, I
So
don't need competition.
yeah, since it's already played out, you know.
Stephanie
Don't need,
Meyer's coming back. That's already a couple of million books I'm not going to sell this year.
what would you suggest to a brand new writer or someone that's just trying to get into the vampire genre that they do? Just one thing that you would suggest, and I'll start with you guys, Ilona and Gordon.
Oh boy. Read widely. Write the book you can't find. Write the vampire you can't find that you want to read about, but they're just not there. That's actually how most successful books are written, I think. We write something to entertain ourselves collectively, you know, as all writers, and you know, hopefully somebody else finds it entertaining. I just want to mention that the panelists keep dropping.
I
Like,
know.
vampire conspiracy is clearly
Yes.
onto us.
Yeah, we're dropping like flies. I would agree with the read widely simply for the fact that we touched on tropes. Know what the old tropes are. Know what the rules are before you break them, and then break them, because you know, well, this is why this rule is dumb. Okay, this is why garlic is dumb. Like John talked about, this is why maybe someone that was born Jewish, if you're going to shove a cross in their face, they're going to shove it up your butt. Sorry, the PG-13 thing. Know why that wouldn't work, though. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, like what are your rules? What are you sticking with? You know, yes, you can totally write a book about the family of vampires who are, you know, as you mentioned, Borat, and who are having an issue with their garbage not being picked up. It's like, you know, get aggravated. I'm gonna eat the garbage man. If you eat the garbage man, who's gonna pick up our garbage? You know, so that's what you're going for. Try to entertain yourself as you write.
I think, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
All right, great. Susan, Clay?
I mean, Clay mentioned it earlier. I mean, be perseverant, because the waves are going to come. It's going to be high 1 minute and it's going to be low the next. And no publisher's going to want anything. They're going to say they're done. And then the next, you know, next year, next couple of months, suddenly it's hot, depending on what fired something at some point in the industry. So don't lose faith, because, you know, if you've got something you think is really good, if you found something that's going to be unique and cool, and everybody's telling you vampires, it's so boring, we've had so many, just like, let it go. Don't let it go. If you feel that you've brought something unique to the genre, then that story has to be told, and don't listen to everybody who's telling you to put the pen down and write something else. If this is what you want and you think you've got something cool, just keep going. It will come back up again, and you just got to hold on to it, and eventually it'll find its niche.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to, obviously I agree with that. That's good advice for any sort of writing.
Yeah.
Don't give up. I mean, otherwise it won't get published if you don't finish it. Know your mythology. As Gordon was saying, to read widely and know what the rules are before you subvert them or before you follow them. Either way, I mean, write the book you want to write. If you can do something new, for God's sake, do it. But know your mythology. Do some research in not just in vampire fiction, but in some vampire nonfiction as well, and understand the depth of the world you're getting into. And then, you know, you want him to wear a cape and speak with a Romanian accent? Go nuts.
Right. And now you said they told you they were done when you wrote the first novel. How many have you guys done, just for clarification?
We did 4. We did a 5th, but it's still sitting there. We elected not to go forward with it. We're doing other things now that aren't vampire-y, but yeah, we did 4 and they did pretty well. They're still in print. They're still selling.
Still get a royalty check from them.
Yeah, we just got one.
People still buy them.
All right, and John.
Yeah, what they said. Read the canon. Know who you're ripping off.
File off the serial numbers.
Yeah, know who you're ripping off and file the VIN numbers off of it, because you're going to end up on a panel sitting. You're going to end up on a panel sitting either next to in the flesh or virtually next to a guy who's a descendant of the guy you're ripping off. So. So know what you're doing. Yeah, and write your book. And it's gonna suck sometimes. Parts of it are awful. The parts where people tell you your book is played out or your idea is played out, that's terrible. But then when you get one email from somebody who says this was awesome, it was great. I was late for work today because I stayed up reading your book. That's fantastic. They usually start by swearing at you in those emails, And that's okay, because that's kind of most of the emails I get anyway, is someone swearing at me. I'm in publishing, for God's sake.
All right.
If you're
Finally,
John, one of those people sending you an email, maybe Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah.
sure. All right, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think everybody's kind of touched on it, but know what your rules are so that when you break them, you know why you're not actually breaking them. So it makes sense in the world you've built and all that. And also, I think as a writer, James Maxey said something very close to the best novel you never write is worse than the worst novel you ever finish. So if you never finish it, it doesn't matter.
All right. And I do want to thank everyone that's still here on the panel, and of course everyone that had to leave early. Let's go around the room and have you guys tell us where people can find you on your socials. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Jeremy.
jflewis.net. I'm also on Facebook, and on Twitter I think I'm at jf_Lewis.
Thank you. And then Clay and Susan.
We are at Clay and Susan Griffith .com. We're both on Facebook. We each have a Facebook account, and then we have a joint account, which is Clay and Susan. And we are at Clay and Susan. Really should have put her name first at some point. We're at Clay and Susan on Twitter.
So we know who handles the social media now.
No, I do most of it. I just have it bookmarked.
He does.
And then Ilona and Gordon.
Oh boy, your best bet is probably Ilona-Andrews.com. We do have Facebook and Twitter pages, but they're basically the feed from the blog that goes automatically, because social media is kind of distracting and tends to kill creativity a little bit, at least for me. So yeah, I guess, come to the website, and from there there's links.
Yeah, our main thing I would say would be the blog.
Yeah.
We're not tweeting a lot of stuff or Facebooking. It's all very official, because we're trying to stay, I guess it's going to sound terribly cowardly, but we try to stay out of politics and religion to some extent. And so we're very buy my book. Do you remember the critic? Do you remember the critic buy my book? That's our social media.
We give away a lot of free fiction on the website. We do occasionally say something about politics when things are incredibly dire, but mostly it's just the website. Sorry.
Yeah.
Great. And finally, John.
Fallstaffbooks.com is where you can find out everything about new releases and what would typically be appearances, except for the world. I have a Facebook group that is very active. It's called John G. Hartness Books. That gives you behind the scenes access, and that is all books. That's all professional me. And then there's my Twitter feed, which is at John Hartness, which is full of profanity and politics. So if you want unexpurgated Hartness, it's at John Hartness. And I retweet a lot of things from a lot of people, and I take profanity-laden pot shots at the president every day, because
your twin is here.
We all do. But
Yeah.
John, you said that's the unexpurgated John. Has there ever been an expurgated John?
I have not dropped an F-bomb in the hour and 9 minutes we have been on this fucking panel, Clay. And you get one and maintain PG-13 status, so I waited until the end to use it.
You're a pro.
All right.
Because if it's in the first 5 minutes, YouTube won't ever let you monetize your videos.
Oh, man.
That's why the Falstaff YouTube channel will never be monetized.
Well, on that note, I would like to thank everyone for coming, and we'll see you guys next week in the panel room. Bye.
Thank you, Jason.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everybody.
Great job.